The mansion stood at the top of the hill like a silent ruler, watching the city below without mercy. Its tall iron gates were always closed, its stone walls high and cold. From the outside, it looked like a dream built from money. Shining windows, perfect gardens, endless space. But inside, warmth did not live there. Fear did. Every step inside the mansion echoed louder than it should have. The halls were wide, polished, and spotless, yet they felt empty. Even during the day, sunlight struggled to make the place feel alive. It slipped through the tall windows and fell on marble floors, but it brought no comfort. The air itself felt heavy, as if the house was holding its breath. Servants moved quietly, like shadows. They avoided eye contact and kept their heads low. No one laughed here. No one spoke unless spoken to. Whispers traveled through the kitchen and staff rooms, but they never lasted long. Fear cut conversations short. At the center of that fear was the billionaire's fiancée. Her name was rarely spoken out loud. When it was, voices dropped to a whisper. Some called her cold. Others called her cruel. But everyone agreed on one thing. She was not someone cross. She did not need to raise her voice to command attention. Her presence alone was enough. When she entered a room, silence followed. Servants froze, hearts racing, afraid of making even the smallest mistake. A misplaced glass, a wrinkle in a curtain, a delayed response. Any of it could bring consequences. Maids never lasted long here. Some left after a week. Others barely made it through a single day. They packed their bags quietly, often leaving before sunrise, faces pale and eyes tired. No one stopped them. No one blamed them. Everyone understood. The gardeners outside worked with the same fear. Even in the open air, they felt trapped. Heads down, hands busy, movements careful. They knew her eyes could appear anywhere, watching, judging, finding fault. No one ever spoke of kindness when speaking of her. Only rules, only control, only distance. Yet, no one truly knew her either. She moved through the mansion like a queen made of ice. Perfect, untouchable, and alone. Her face showed little emotion. Her words were few, but sharp. Behind her strict order and cold discipline was something hidden, something broken, though no one dared to look closely enough to see it. Above all of this stood the billionaire himself. He owned the mansion. He owned the silence. He owned the fear, even if he never admitted it. He was a powerful man, respected and feared across the business world. His days were filled with meetings, deals, and endless phone calls. His nights were often spent away, in distant cities or behind closed office doors. When he was home, his mind was still elsewhere. He walked through the mansion without truly seeing it. He did not notice how servants stiffened when his fiancée passed by. He did not hear the whispers that died when footsteps approached. He did not see the fear in the eyes of those who kept his home running. Or perhaps he chose not to. To him, the mansion was efficient, quiet, controlled, just the way he liked it. But control came at a cost. This house had everything money could buy, yet it lacked the one thing no fortune could replace: human warmth. There were no family dinners filled with laughter, no music drifting through the halls, no sense of belonging, only order, only fear. The mansion was not just a home. It was a cage, beautiful on the outside, cold and empty within. And at its heart lived a woman feared by all, loved by none, guarding herself with walls even thicker than the stone that surrounded her. No one could have imagined that this carefully balanced world of fear and silence was about to change. Not because of power, not because of wealth, but because of someone small, unnoticed, and unexpected. Someone who would soon walk through those iron gates and challenge everything this mansion stood for. The silence would not last forever. She arrived early in the morning, just as the sun began to rise behind the hill. The iron gates of the mansion stood tall before her, dark and heavy, as if testing her courage. The new maid paused for a moment, her small bag resting against her shoulder. She took a deep breath, steadying herself. This place was nothing like the narrow streets she had come from, nothing like the tiny rooms and thin walls she once called home. Her clothes were clean, but worn. Her shoes had been repaired more than once. Everything about her spoke of a life shaped by struggle, not comfort. Yet her eyes held something rare, quiet determination. She had heard the rumors. Everyone had. They said the woman of the house was cruel, that maids left crying, that fear lived inside those walls. Friends had warned her not to come. Even the agency clerk had hesitated before handing her the address. But hunger does not listen to fear. She needed the job, desperately. Bills waited. A past filled with loss followed her everywhere. Walking away was not an option. So she tightened her grip on her bag and stepped forward, pushing open the gates that had scared so many before her. The mansion was breathtaking. Tall pillars, wide steps, shining windows. Everything spoke of wealth beyond imagination. The gardens were perfect, trimmed with care, flowers standing in neat lines like soldiers confirmed to duty. For a brief moment, she almost forgot where she was. Then the silence reached her. It was not peaceful. It was heavy. As she walked inside, her footsteps echoed loudly, too loudly, across the marble floor. The air felt cold, despite the early sun. She sensed it immediately. This place did not welcome people. It only tolerated them. A few servants noticed her. They stopped what they were doing and stared, eyes filled with something between pity and disbelief. One maid glanced at her bag, already guessing how short her stay might be. Another lowered her gaze, as if she didn't want to be seen noticing the newcomer. No one smiled. No one spoke. The new maid felt their unspoken warning pressing against her chest. She understood it without words. They expected her to fail, to leave like all the others. She did not blame them. She had known hardship long before she arrived here. Loss had shaped her life early. People she loved had disappeared, some by choice, some by fate. Promises had been broken. Trust had been costly. Those wounds still lived inside her, quiet but deep. But they had also taught her something important: how to endure. She had learned that fear only grows when you run from it. That dignity survives even in the smallest acts. That kindness, when offered freely, can be a form of strength. A senior staff member finally approached her, voice low and careful. The maid listened closely, nodding with respect. She answered softly, not out of fear, but out of humility. As she was led deeper into the mansion, her heart beat faster. Not because she wanted to turn back, but because she knew this place would test her in ways she could not yet see. Still, she walked on. With each step, the walls seemed taller. The silence grew thicker. Somewhere ahead waited the woman everyone feared. Yet, beneath her calm expression, something else stirred. Hope. Not the loud kind, not the foolish kind, but a small, steady belief that darkness did not always win, that even the coldest places could change. She did not come to challenge anyone. She came to work. She came to survive. But unknowingly, she also brought something this mansion had not felt in a very long time: a quiet light, stepping gently into the shadows. And for the first time in years, the mansion's silence was about to be disturbed. The first meeting happened sooner than the new maid expected. She was arranging flowers in the main hallway when the air suddenly changed. The mansion seemed to hold its breath. Soft footsteps echoed across the marble floor, slow, controlled, and heavy with authority. The fiancé had entered the hall. The other servants froze. Hands stopped moving. Eyes dropped to the floor. Fear traveled silently from one person to the next, as if everyone already knew what was coming. The maid felt it too, but she did not run. She straightened her back and continued working, her hands steady, her movements careful. Not rushed, not slow, simply focused. The fiancée stopped a few steps away. Her presence was sharp, almost cutting. She wore perfection like armor. Every detail flawless, every expression controlled. Her eyes scanned the room, searching for errors, for weakness, for something to correct. They landed on the new maid. There was a pause. The maid could feel the weight of that stare pressing against her chest. Others expected her to shrink, to tremble, to apologize for something she had not done. But she did not. She lowered her gaze respectfully, not in fear, but in acknowledgement. Her voice, when she spoke, was calm and steady. No excuses, no pleading, just honesty. The fiancée did not expect that. She waited, for panic, for nervousness, for the familiar signs of submission. They never came. Instead, she saw something else. Quiet confidence, a stillness that did not challenge her, yet did not bow either. That unsettled her. Days passed, and more encounters followed. Each time, the tension returned. Each time, the staff braced themselves for anger or punishment. And each time, the new maid remained the same, polite, observant, careful with her work, and consistent in her behavior. She noticed things others avoided noticing. She saw the dark circles beneath the fiancé's eyes, the way her shoulders tightened when she thought no one was watching, the silence that followed her long walks through the halls. This was not just cruelty. This was exhaustion, loneliness, pain buried so deep it had turned into control. One evening, the maid adjusted the curtains in the sitting room, letting in a softer light. It was a small change, almost unnoticeable. Another day, she placed a warm shawl nearby before the temperature dropped. She did not announce it. She did not seek praise. She simply did what felt right. The fiancé noticed. She noticed the quiet order, the careful attention, the absence of fear in the maid's eyes, and it disturbed her more than rebellion ever could. She had built her world on intimidation. Fear had always worked. It kept people distant, safe. But this girl did not follow the rules. She did not try to impress. She did not try to escape. She stayed. Whispers spread among the staff. They watched closely, waiting for the inevitable explosion. They were sure it was only a matter of time before the new maid was dismissed like the others. But days turned into weeks, and nothing happened. No shouting, no punishment, no dismissal. The mansion felt different, not warmer, not kinder, but unsettled, as if something long frozen had begun to crack. The fiancée, for the first time in years, found herself unsettled by kindness. It reminded her of things she had buried long ago, things she did not want to feel. And the maid, though she said nothing, understood one truth clearly. The most powerful defiance was not loud. It was gentle, it was patient, and it had only just begun. The walls were starting to shift. From a distance, the fiancée seemed untouchable. She moved through the mansion with perfect control, her posture straight, her steps measured. To the servants, she was still the woman of fear, the one whose presence tightened their chests and silenced their voices. But the new maid began to see something else. She noticed it in the quiet hours, early mornings and late nights, when the mansion slept. The fiancé would sit alone in the sitting room, lights dim, staring out the window as if searching for something she could never reach. Her hands, once sharp and commanding, sometimes trembled when she thought no one was watching. This was not the image of power the staff knew. The maid did not stare. She did not ask questions. She simply observed, carefully, respectfully, and piece by piece, a different story began to form. The fiancé had not always lived in wealth. Long before the mansion, there had been small rooms and empty cupboards. Long nights where no one came when she cried. Promises that were made and never kept. Love that was given only when it was convenient. She had learned early that depending on others led to disappointment. When she reached out, she was ignored. When she trusted, she was betrayed. Each time, something inside her hardened. She told herself she would never be weak again. Fear became her protection. Control became her safety. Even her engagement was not born from love. It was a decision, careful and calculated. The billionaire offered stability, respect, and a place in a world that could no longer hurt her the way it once had. Or so she believed. She stood beside him at public events, flawless and composed. But inside, she felt invisible. He admired her strength, not her heart. He valued her presence, not her pain. Still, she stayed, because leaving meant facing the past again, and she had spent her life running from it. The maid began to understand this, not through words, but through moments. She saw the fiancé flinch at raised voices, even when they were not meant for her. She noticed how she avoided certain rooms, certain memories, how silence followed her not because she demanded it, but because she feared what noise might uncover. One afternoon, the maid found an old photo left behind on a table. A younger version of the fiancé stared back, eyes hopeful, smile unsure. The The maid gently placed it back where it belonged, untouched, unmentioned. That small act spoke louder than questions ever could. The fiancé noticed. She noticed how the maid never mocked her, never whispered behind her back, never looked at her with hatred or fear, only with understanding. And that unsettled her deeply. She had built her life on walls so high no one could climb them. Yet here was someone who did not try to break them, only stood patiently at their edge. For the first time, the fiancé felt seen. Not admired, not feared, seen. And that frightened her more than loneliness ever had. The maid, too, carried wounds of her own. Loss had taught her empathy. Pain had taught her patience. She did not excuse cruelty, but she recognized its roots. She understood that fear often wore the face of anger. So she stayed careful, gentle, steady, and slowly, the mansion began to feel the weight of a truth long buried. The woman everyone feared had once been a child who needed love. The armor she wore was heavy, and it was cutting her from the inside. As the maid walked away that evening, she knew something had changed. Not in words, not in actions, but in awareness. The fear had a face now, and behind it was a woman still learning how to survive. The silence between them was no longer empty. It was filled with understanding. Change did not arrive loudly. It came in small moments, so quiet they were almost missed. The maid continued her work as she always had. She did not announce herself. She did not demand attention. Yet, her presence began to leave traces behind, like footprints in fresh snow. One morning, the fiancé entered the dining room expecting the usual stiffness, the silence, the fear. Instead, she found a table prepared with careful detail, not excessive, not cold, just thoughtful. A cup placed where sunlight reached it first. A chair pulled back slightly, as if someone had considered comfort. She paused. Confusion crossed her face, quick but real. This was not fear. This was care. She felt it again later that day, when a meeting ran longer than expected. A warm drink waited nearby, untouched, offered without a word. No servant haberth. No one watched for approval. The fiancé did not know how to react. For years, she had trained herself to expect resistance or obedience. Kindness without reason felt dangerous. It made her uneasy. It stirred something she had locked away. Why was this girl not afraid? That question followed her through the halls. At night, sleep became harder. Thoughts she had buried began to surface. Memories she had controlled now pushed back. The more the maid treated her with calm respect, the more her armor felt heavy. She found herself snapping less, but feeling more. That frightened her. Control had always protected her. Anger had kept people distant. But now, without realizing it, she was letting moments slip by without correction, without punishment. And the mansion noticed. Servants whispered, not in fear, but curiosity. The tension that once filled every corner began to loosen. Meals passed without raised voices. Mistakes were met with silence instead of rage. Some staff still walked carefully, unsure if the calm would last. Others dared to breathe a little easier. The maid noticed them watching her, wondering how long this peace would survive. She wondered too, but she did not stop. She stayed consistent. She showed up the same way each day, steady, respectful, present. She did not push for closeness. She did not step back into fear. And slowly, the fiancé began to change. Not openly, not completely, but in moments. She lingered longer in rooms where people worked. She asked questions, not commands, but real questions. She corrected less, observed more. Then came the moment that surprised everyone. A vase shattered in the hallway. Time froze. A young servant stood trembling, waiting for anger, for punishment, for the familiar storm. It never came. The fiancé looked at the broken pieces, then at the servant. Then, almost unconsciously, she waved her hand and walked away. The silence that followed was louder than any shout. The maid saw it all. She saw the struggle behind the fiancé's eyes, the effort it took to walk away, to choose calm over control. That night, the billionaire returned home late, as usual. He noticed nothing obvious, no grand change, no dramatic shift. But something felt different. The house was quieter, not tense, just quiet. He dismissed the feeling and moved on, unaware that something fragile was forming beneath the surface, something that could not be controlled by money or power. The fiancée stood alone by the window once more, but this time her reflection looked different. Less sharp, less guarded. She did not understand what was happening to her, only that the walls she had built were beginning to crack. And cracks, once formed, could not be undone. They let light in, but they also let pain return. As the maid turned off the lights that evening, she knew the hardest part had begun. Healing was never comfortable, and the ice was starting to melt. What followed would test them both. The breaking point came without warning. It arrived on a night meant to celebrate success. The mansion buzzed with unfamiliar energy as guests filled the halls. Business partners, investors, people dressed in confidence and expensive smiles. Crystal glasses clinked. Soft music played. Everything looked perfect. Too perfect. The fiancée stood beside the billionaire, calm and composed, her face flawless as always. But inside, her chest felt tight. She sensed that even before it happened, something was wrong. Then the whispers began. At first, they were quiet. Short glances. Phones pulled out and hidden again. Faces turning away when she looked too closely. And then she heard it. A business scandal. The billionaire's name was being dragged through the room, tied to accusations of betrayal and dishonesty. A deal gone wrong. Trust broken. Investors angry. Partners furious. The room shifted. Eyes that once admired now judged. Smiles faded. Respect disappeared. The billionaire stepped away to take urgent calls, his voice tense, his focus already gone. In seconds, she was alone, standing in a room full of people who no longer saw her as powerful. They saw her as replaceable, humiliated, invisible. Her breath grew shallow. The walls felt closer. The noise too loud. The control she had held so tightly for years began to slip through her fingers. She excused herself and rushed down the hallway, heels echoing sharply against the floor. Her reflection in the mirror looked unfamiliar. Eyes wide, skin pale, strength cracking. By the time she reached her room, her body gave in. Her legs weakened. Her hands shook. She collapsed onto the edge of the bed, struggling to breathe as fear finally caught up to her. This was it, the moment she had spent her life avoiding. She was losing everything. The power, the security, the illusion that she was untouchable. And worst of all, she felt alone. No one came after her. Not the guests. Not the billionaire. Only silence followed. Minutes passed. Or hours. She couldn't tell. Then the door opened softly. It was the maid. She stood still for a moment, unsure whether to enter. Then she stepped forward, calm and steady, carrying a glass of water and a light blanket. She did not rush. She did not speak. She simply knelt beside her. That was when the fiancé broke. Tears fell, hot, uncontrollable, years in the making. Her shoulders shook as the strength she had worn like armor finally shattered. She turned her face away, ashamed to be seen like this. But the maid stayed. She placed the blanket gently around her shoulders. She set the glass within reach. Her presence was quiet, solid, unafraid. For the first time in her life, the fiancé felt powerless and safe. She realized something terrifying in that moment, that all her fear, all her control, had been hiding one truth. She was terrified of being unloved, terrified of being abandoned, terrified of ending up alone, just as she had begun. The maid did not fix anything. She did not offer answers. She did not promise safety. She simply stayed, and that was enough. Outside the room, the mansion waited in silence. The staff sensed a shift. The night felt heavier, charged with change. Later, the billionaire returned, his confidence shaken, his future uncertain. He stopped outside the door, but did not enter. For the first time, he realized how little he truly knew the woman he was meant to marry. Inside, the fiancée wiped her tears and took a deep breath. Something inside her had changed. The control she once depended on was gone. In its place was fear, but also clarity. She had reached the bottom, and she was not alone. As the maid quietly stood to leave, the fiancé stopped her with a trembling hand. Not a command, not a demand, a request. The power had shifted, and in that shift, something real had begun. This moment did not heal her, but cracked her open, and through that crack, the first light of transformation finally entered. Nothing would ever be the same again. Morning arrived quietly. The mansion looked the same, but it no longer felt the same. The fiancée stood by the window, watching light slowly fill the room. Her eyes were tired, swollen from tears, but clearer than they had been in years. For the first time, she did not rush to put her armor back on. She stayed still. What had happened tonight before could not be undone. The scandal, the fear, the collapse, all the control she once depended on had slipped away. And in that emptiness, truth had risen. She finally admitted what she had avoided for so long. Her life was built on fear. Her engagement was not love, but protection. She had chosen safety over connection, power over trust. She had also hurt people, the servants, the staff, the very home she ruled with cold authority. That truth burned. Later that day, she walked through the mansion, not as a ruler, but as a woman facing her past. Each step felt heavy. She noticed faces that once looked away, now watching her carefully, unsure of what version of her would appear. She stopped in the hallway where Maid once quit in tears. In the dining room, where silence had replaced joy. In the garden where workers had kept their heads down. Regret settled deep in her chest. She could not erase the damage she had caused, but she could no longer pretend it never happened. Meanwhile, the new maid packed her small bag. She folded her clothes slowly, her hands unsure. She had come to this mansion for survival, not transformation. What she had become part of was bigger than she expected. Staying meant stepping deeper into emotional territory she had spent years protecting herself from. Leaving meant walking away from a woman standing at the edge of change. Forgiveness was not simple. The maid remembered fear, long nights, pain caused by others who never said sorry. She knew that kindness did not always lead to healing. She stood at her crossroads, stay, leave, or forgive. Downstairs, the billionaire finally faced silence that money could not fix. The calls had stopped. The noise of business faded. And in its place was something unfamiliar, reflection. He realized how often he had been absent, how he had filled his life with success but ignored the emotional damage left behind. He saw now that his fiancée's strength had been a shield, not confidence. He had admired her control, but he had never asked why she needed it. That realization shook him more than the scandal ever could. Later, paths crossed, not in anger, not in command, but in honesty. The fiancée spoke without cruelty, without fear. She did not defend herself. She did not blame others. She acknowledged her mistakes and the pain she had caused. For the first time, her words were not sharp. They were real. The maid listened. She did not interrupt. She did not rush to comfort. She listened because being heard mattered more than being forgiven. When a moment came, forgiveness did not arrive as a grand gesture. It arrived quietly. The maid chose to stay, not because the pain was forgotten, but because forgiveness was freedom, because holding on to anger would only continue the cycle. She did not excuse the past. She released it. The fiancée felt something lift from her chest, something she had carried since childhood. Forgiveness did not make her weak. It made her human. And for the first time, she chose humanity over power. The billionaire stood watching, understanding at last that control could not build a home. Only presence could. The mansion did not change overnight, but something important had shifted. Fear no longer ruled every corner. Silence no longer meant punishment. And forgiveness, once seen as weakness, had become the strongest force within those walls. As evening fell, the maid unpacked her bag. The fiancé stood nearby, uncertain but open. Both women knew the hardest part still lay ahead. But for the first time, they were walking forward, not alone, not afraid, and not pretending. The final chapter was ready to begin. Redemption did not arrive as a miracle. It arrived as work. Days passed, then weeks, and the mansion slowly began to change, not on the outside, but within its walls. The fiancé did not wake up one morning transformed. Fear did not disappear overnight. Old habits still whispered to her, especially in moments of stress. Control still felt safer than trust. But now, she noticed those impulses, and she stopped herself. She began with small steps. She spoke more gently. She listened instead of commanding. When mistakes happened, she paused before reacting. Sometimes she still failed. Sometimes her voice sharpened. But this time, she returned to make things right. That alone surprised everyone. Staff watched carefully, unsure whether this change would last. They had learned not to trust kindness that came too fast. But the days kept passing, and the change stayed. She started walking through the mansion differently, slower, more aware. She asked names she had never bothered to learn. She thanked people, awkwardly at first, as if the words felt strange on her tongue. Trust did not bloom instantly, but began. The mansion felt lighter. Not joyful yet, but breathable. Laughter did not echo through the halls, but tension no longer ruled them. People stood straighter, eyes lifted. Conversations lasted longer than whispers. Hope moved in quietly. The maid remained exactly as she had always been. She did not claim credit. She did not change her tone or behavior. She continued her work with the same care, the same calm strength. But now, others watched her with respect. They saw what she had done, not with power, not with demands, but with patience. The fiancée noticed this too. She began to understand that leadership did not mean fear. That respect could not be forced. It had to be earned. One afternoon, she stood in the same hallway where fear once lived strongest. Sunlight poured through the windows, warming the floor. She realized she no longer felt the urge to control the silence. She allowed it to exist. The billionaire returned home more often now, not to escape problems, but to face them. He saw the change, not just in a mansion, but in the woman he thought he knew. She was softer, stronger, more real, and he finally understood his role in the emptiness they had lived in. He began showing up, not as a provider, but as a presence. Conversations replaced silence. Listening replaced distance. Their relationship did not suddenly become perfect, but it became honest. And honesty, at last, gave it a chance. The greatest change came quietly one evening. A small gathering. No guests. No pressure. Just staff sharing a simple meal together. Something that had never happened before. The fiancée stood at the doorway, uncertain. Then she stepped inside. No one froze. No one ran. They welcomed her. In that moment, her chest tightened. Not with fear, but with emotion. For the first time, she was not being obeyed. She was being accepted. Her eyes met the maid's across the room. No words were spoken. None were needed. The maid had never tried to save her. She had only stayed long enough for the fiancé to save herself. As night fell, the mansion settled into a different kind of silence, one filled with peace instead of fear. The iron gates still stood. The walls were still high. But inside, something precious had taken root. Love. Not just romantic love, but self-love, compassion, and human connection. The fiancé stood by the window one last time, not searching for something lost, but reflecting on something found. She was no longer feared by all, no longer loved by none. And the maid, the quiet hero, returned to her room, knowing she had changed a world without ever raising her voice. The mansion, once a place of cold power, had become a home. Not because fear left completely, but because love finally arrived and stayed. And sometimes that is the greatest victory of all.